This video describes what the application actually does. We've got the data we need, the source file, and where we want to put the things that we've worked with. We've got a prefix which is going to be given to the files to make them meaningful when we need to rename them to relate to tasks or whatever it is you do. Everything happens with this button. This is the rename button. And what the rename button does is it runs code that calls methods which are coded into these three classes: the extract, the rename, and the utility classes. These are method-only classes. They have no data members, so they are method-only, and we just call those, and it allows us to isolate them so that they can be maintained easily and separately and just called when needed. So I've selected the button, and if I go to there, press my F12, I'm taken to the routine that's run when that button is clicked. Remember, this is an event-driven program, and what happens is that this code runs when that button is clicked. What happens is, let me walk it through. We get a string from the source file text box. This is the path to the file that we want to work with. We check whether we've got a file to work with and give a message to the user if not. Having got that, we now look at the destination folder where we want to put the files that are going to be extracted. Once again, we do some error checking to make sure we've actually got a folder to work for and inform the user if there isn't. It can't work without both of these bits of operations, both of these bits of information. Now, given the fact that we've got a string inside the text box, we now have to work with formatting to make sure that we get the escape characters. The backslashes are doubles when we need to use them inside strings, because we can't create them as string interpolated literals. So what we're going to do is we're going to use regular expressions, our friend regular expressions. And what this does is it replaces single backslashes, with double backslashes. It can then be read. So in my source file string, replace a single with a double. Now, believe it or not, that double is the way it's done in regular expressions, and this is the destination folder doing exactly the same, so that we can now work with those strings as a path. Now we get the data that we want to have as a prefix. Once again, if there's null or empty, this time we don't inform the user, we just give it a default value of task. What we now do is we call the methods from these classes, and we'll look at those next, to extract, rename, and show. There was one line of code that I kind of skipped over when I shouldn't have done. When we use the folder picker, the folder dialog, we get a path, but the path isn't complete. We need to add what it's given us and an extra backslash. Otherwise, we don't get the path right into the folder itself, and it goes up one level too high. So I skipped over that. I shouldn't have done. I apologize. So that's what I've done here. So let's look at what's happening with our code. So we're going to get an int, which is a result. I just use this method to give me confirmation and debug that there's something has actually happened. And we're going to call this file moved, and it's going to use the extract class, which is a static class, so we can call it directly without implementing an object. And it's got a method called moveZip. Let's look at moveZip. This is the moveZip method inside the extract class. As I say, it's a method-only class. And I want to just reiterate, you need to remember to have added that reference or this class will not work. That's to the reference to system.io.compression.filesystem. It doesn't use it in this method, but in the extract file method, we would be in trouble if we didn't have that reference. I'll say it again in a minute. So what do we do? Right. So first thing we want to do is if it's already been copied, we don't want to copy it again unless the user confirms that they want to replace the one that was already there. So we send a message to the user. We check if the file name exists first. How do we do that? Right. So we get the file name. We don't want the whole path. We just want to look at the file name. And we want to say that if that file exists in the destination folder, check with the user whether they want to replace it. Now that's a dialog box which says, do you want to replace it? confirms yes, no, and then it's got the question mark, sort of an indicator of what's happening in the dialog box. So if they respond yes, it gives them a message deleting and replacing. It deletes the existing one and replaces it with the new one that we've got in our source file. If they say no, if it doesn't exist, then we just straight copy it. So that's what we've done there. So we've said, if it exists and you want to say replace, copy. If it doesn't exist, just copy. So that's what happens with that. Now we now move on to the extraction of the file method itself. This is an astonishingly simple one, .NET Libraries. It shows how far they've come. In the previous versions of this software, you would have had to put special libraries in to work with zips and so forth, but it's extraordinarily easy. So what it's going to do is, remembering that that reference must exist, because we're going to use an object called a zip file. Yeah, and that's the reference that we've got to do. So our method has two things that it's going to do. It's going to take the name of the file, which is source file, and it needs the destination folder to make sure that the destination folder is where the stuff goes. String zip file equals destination folder and the path to the file inside that folder, because we've got the name. What we're going to do is string extract path is the destination folder, and then one line of code extracts the folders. Zip file.extract to directory zip file destination folder. Then we delete the zip that we had and return 1. So that's the first part. We've now got in our destination folder the original zip with all of its components extracted. They're still named in the way that it's done by Moodle, and we don't want it that way, and that's what we'll do in the next part, which is rename them.